I was a new nurse at our hospital and only been working there a couple of months. I had brought a patient of mine up to day surgery from the ER for an endoscopy, and they called back down and asked me to bring her family up because she only spoke Italian and not enough English, and they needed someone to consent for the procedure. After dropping them off, I walked past the waiting room to head back down the hall to the elevators. I took the back way to get to the ER, and the hallways are all deserted. It used to be the pediatric wing of the hospital, but that is all shut down for years, and the rooms are just empty and full of broken equipment and beds and crap. As I reached the old nurses' station at the T-junction between the pediatric hallway and the hallway that goes to the elevators, I saw a little girl standing across from the nurses' station further down the hall. She had big pigtails, was wearing a brown dress, white shoes, holding a teddy bear. I thought perhaps she was a family member who had walked away from the day surgery waiting room. I was concerned that she would go into one of the rooms and get hurt or lost. So I said, "Hey little girl, what are you doing? You don't need to be over there, you're gonna get hurt." And I walked around the nursing station to go grab her hand and bring her back. I shit you not, she vanished as I got about 15 feet away from her. Every hair on my body stood up straight, and I turned and ran like a bat out of hell down to the elevator. I pounded that button for what seemed like an eternity until the elevator got to the floor. As I got back to the ER, I walked up to the nurse's desk, white as a sheet. And one of the older nurses looked at me and said, "Jesus Christ, what's wrong with you?" I remember babbling like an idiot as I tried to tell them what happened. After listening to me for a moment or two, the nurse said, "Oh, you saw the little girl ghost. She's been around here for years." And I remember saying, "Well, thanks for telling me about it before this." Apparently the ghost has even been seen down in the ER, ducking in and out of patient rooms and peeking around curtains. My wife worked up on the TH floor, and she said that one time on night a whole row of patient rooms started yelling about a little girl that was running around in the rooms. I guess she gets around. I'm not a doctor, but I'm a nurse. I work with geriatric patients, and there was this incident about 3 years ago. Before I explain, let me say that I don't believe in ghosts. Anyway, this one time I was working the night shift and I was super sleepy, so I decided to skip lunch because I wasn't hungry and go to my car and sleep for 30 minutes. I got inside my car, covered myself with my sweater, set the timer on my phone, and immediately knocked out. I'm dreaming, but in my dream I'm still awake, just sitting there. Someone taps on my car window and I see that it's one of my patients. We'll call her D. Surprised, I ask D what the hell she's doing outside, and she tells me she is looking for her daughter. I tell her to go back inside and that we will call her daughter in the morning. My patient becomes angry and starts banging on my car window. I kind of freak out and try to reach for the door handle to get out and calm her down, but I quickly realize I can't move. Let me add that I frequently experience sleep paralysis, so even though I am asleep, I realize what is happening. I fight it and try squirming my body in an attempt to wake myself up. I finally manage to wake up, and my heart is racing and my forehead is a bit sweaty. I sit there for about a minute, realize it was all a dream, and roll the window down to cool myself off. My break is over and I clock back in and see that my supervisor and 2 other nurses are huddled in front of a room. I am still by the station clocking when they see me and call me over. I walk over thinking maybe something was wrong with the ventilator or the patient fell, but my supervisor tells me D died while I was on my lunch break. Since most of our patients are DNR, I was not paged. It took a couple of seconds for the message to register, and I freaked out internally. I got goosebumps but didn't mention anything to my supervisor about the dream. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, and I mostly likely had that dream because she was the last patient I interacted with before my break. So she was still on my mind, and I was mentally going over my patient's charts in my head. Was unconscious for about 2 weeks, and spent a total of almost 3 months in the hospital. I used to visit him every day from morning until night. We didn't have any insurance at the time, so he had to stay in a ward with up to 7 other patients at a time, although usually it was 3 to 4 patients. One of the patients was a man in his mid to late 60s. He was a very kind man whose bed was directly in front of my father's. One day I came back from a quick lunch break only to find my father sleeping, and there was nothing on the TV for me to watch. I was bored and sort of zoned out, staring in the general direction of the elderly patient in front of me, who happened to be getting a visit from his kids and grandchildren. As I was zoned out, I started to notice something floating above this man. I looked up and saw 3 shadowy figures floating in a circular pattern around him. They looked like 3 people wearing dark cloaks but with no hands or feet, and seemed to be diving in and out of a hole I couldn't see. One moment they would disappear into the hole, and the next they would pop right back out. I sat there stunned as I watched this, and that's when one of them broke off from the 3 and floated in my direction. It got right in my face, and I just backed my head as far back as I could in the chair I was sitting in. After that, it floated back to the other three, and then they all went out the back wall and disappeared. I had the most sickening feeling that this man was going to die. I just knew that these things were there because he wasn't going to make it. The elderly patient had been fine the whole time I had known him. But later that night he started complaining about stomach pains. The next day he was moved to the private room next to ours. And the day after that I ran into his daughter, who was crying her eyes out. Knowing the answer, I asked her what's wrong. She said, "My father died today, he was fine. And then he just got sicker and died. We still don't know what happened." I felt so sad for her and that lovely family, but there was no point in telling her what I saw, so I kept it to myself. To this day I'm still not 100% sure of what I saw, but it was pretty disturbing if I'm being honest. Nighttime staffing issues. I agreed to rotate to nights to help them out. It was a 4-bed, newly renovated unit. It was around 3 a.m., and I was watching the monitors, listening to the patient snore. The pencil drawer slid open. I didn't think much of it since the hospital was on a very busy avenue, and I thought it was caused by the vibrations from the traffic on the busy road below. After sliding the drawer back several times, I decided if the drawer felt it needed to be opened, so be it. Several minutes later, I heard a noise in the room. The patient's bathroom door opening, and the sound of someone pushing an IV pole. Since I did not have clear view of the bathroom, I just thought one of the staff members from the main floor had dashed in to wash their hands. I looked up from my monitor viewing to see a patient we recently had in the unit. It was Mrs. G, an older woman who came in with atypical chest pain, became septic due to a gallbladder issue. She evidently had expired in the unit. Although the hospital itself had been on this site for years, the unit was newly renovated, right down to tearing down walls and putting up new ones. I heard the patient's bathroom door open, and again I heard the rattling of the IV pole and shuffling feet. I looked up and saw Mrs. G, standing there in the middle of the floor, one hand pushing the IV pole, the other hand on top of the pump on the pole. She stopped walking, turned and waved, nodded her head, said everything was going to be okay, took a few steps and disappeared. It was quite a sight to see. Shortly after that vision, one of the nurses from the floor came in to see if I needed anything. I told her no, I was okay, and asked her if she had ever seen a ghost in the hospital. She looked at me, gasped, and asked no, why, and I explained to her what had just happened. She said she would never step foot in that room again. Mrs. G was the first patient to die in that unit. She was well liked by all the staff, and my feeling was that she was watching over us. The day shift came in, and I told them my story. They weren't surprised. Through the years working at various hospitals, worked as a nurse extern my senior year in nursing school, and heard older nurses telling their stories about ghosts, I thought they were just burnt out. Ha! Yes, there are ghosts in care facilities. If they are not seen, their presence is felt. They leave an energy behind.